morning, afternoon, or evening to everyone, wherever you may be, and welcome to the first in our virtual meetup series that we'll be holding in the run up to our next Global Female Leaders Summit in Berlin in May 2022. I'm delighted to see such a terrific turnout for this event, which will help us to continue building our global community. Thank you so much for your support. A few historical words about Global Female Leaders Summits. In the years since we started this platform in 2014, the Global Female Leaders Group that has gathered at the summit each year has grown from a small group of like-minded executives into a sizable, strong community of top professional leaders from around the world who come together in order to exchange ideas and share experiences, knowing that they are among equals. We strive to emphasize this guiding principle that each of us is where we are because we set out determined to achieve our goals and did so. Many will have had barriers to overcome that may have been related to gender or social issues, but rather than being held back by those barriers, have forged ahead with increased energy and fulfilled their potential anyway. And we all know what that means. The responsibility that it places on our shoulders and the energy it takes to maintain our purpose and focus. This is what the Global Female Leaders Summit is, the place to recharge those batteries, reinforce that determination and renew good acquaintances and friendships, and of course, make new ones in the appropriate environment. To our today's event, it is my great honor and pleasure to welcome as our speaker Audrey Tang. Not only is Audrey Digital Minister of Taiwan and a free software innovator, she is a powerful advocate for collaboration, championing the human factor in our increasingly digitalized world. And to introduce her and moderate this event today, I'm happy to welcome Dr. Melinda Crane, who, apart from being chief correspondent for Deutsche Welle TV, in Germany, USA, has accompanied and moderated our summits almost from the beginning. So Melinda, I'm happy to have you in voice with us. The floor and the microphone is yours.
Thank you so much, Sigrid. And hello, ladies and gentlemen, and let me add my own very warm words of welcome. It is such a pleasure to have you with us and to be back together in the Global Female Leaders setting after so many of us did miss each other last year. And I do have to apologize, I had a few technical difficulties. Sigrid was talking about some of the barriers we all faced making the transition during the pandemic. Had a few of those myself this morning, so I apologize for joining you a bit last minute. This virtual talk that we're having is a premiere, and it could not be a more exciting one because we couldn't have found a more inspiring and influential leader, nor a more newsworthy and crucial topic to launch our new Global Female Leaders series of virtual talks. And as today's format illustrates, the pandemic has fast-forwarded digitalization all across the world, and at the same time, it has revealed glaring gaps in access to and in application of technological solutions. So how to address these and how to better harness technology to solve the pressing global challenges we face is our topic today. And in just a moment, we're going to explore it with Taiwan's trailblazing digital minister, Audrey Tang. Welcome, Audrey Tang. It's really an honor that you are here with us today. And I'll just let Audrey say hello before I move on to share a few hints about our own technology. Hello and welcome.
Hello and good local time, everyone. Really happy to be here virtually.
Good local time is a great expression. I will pick that up and use it myself in future. So before I say a few more words about Audrey Tang's background, let me just share a few quick hints about our own technology here today. So please, everyone, if you'd be so kind, do keep your microphones on mute during the conversation because it does, of course, improve the stability of our connection. But do switch on your camera unless you prefer not to, because it's so nice to know who is with us. Also, we're very eager to hear your questions and short comments. So please share those via text in the live chat or by clicking the hand raising icon when I open the Q&A in the last 10 or 15 minutes of our session. And I think you probably have already seen that this virtual talk is being recorded. It will be made available on the Global Female Leaders website. And we do assume that if you remain with us with your camera on, that that's okay for you. So now, introducing Audrey Tang is a challenge because it amounts to reeling off what sound like paradoxes. A child prodigy who did advanced math at the age of 5 and was programming at the age of 8, yet dropped out of junior high school. A hacker who started her own company at 15, a civil society activist who's now a government minister. Audrey Tang, how do all those parts line up?
Well, they line up beautifully, I guess. Back when I dropped out of middle school when I was 14 years old, I told the head of my school that I want to understand why do people trust each other so quickly online and also distrust each other so quickly online as compared to in-person settings. And that has been my kind of research question. I'm eternally grateful to the head of the school, Principal Du Huiping, for simply saying, she said after listening to my argument, okay, from tomorrow on, you don't have to go to my school anymore. Be free. And that's really shaped my career and my development.
Say a quick word about that move from being a civil society activist, I believe 2014, to then not long afterward joining the government. That seems like a major leap.
Well, we kind of invited ourselves in though, because in March 2014, we occupied the parliament in Taiwan for 3 weeks in the what's called the Sunflower Movement. At the time, the demonstration was not a protest only. It's really a demo of how 500,000 people on the street and many more online can listen to each other at scale toward a trade deal with Beijing at a time. And so basically what we did is to provide a public service with a way to utilize both the hearing and listening functionality and the broadcasting functionality of the new media.
One common denominator for a biography that's as daring as yours has surely got to be inner serenity, and your own unruffled demeanor, as it sometimes has been described, is often attributed to Taoism. Can you tell us just briefly how that shapes your approach, especially to facing challenges?
Yeah, definitely. So a Taoist take on life, as I adhere to, is basically instead of identifying with any particular form or label, as you just described me with, I talk about my experiences instead of overly identifying with them. So I would say, for example, that I had a first puberty when I was 12 and a second puberty when I was 24, but I wouldn't say that I identify as this or that at which time. And this basically allowed me to become a kind of vehicle of experiences rather than confining myself into any particular labels.
I'm going to put another label out there, but link it up to an experience. You are Taiwan's first openly transgender cabinet minister, and you've talked about the transition as a, quote, valuable experience of vulnerability. Can you say a word or two about that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, having gone through 2 puberties, it is more possible for me to empathize with people's common feelings. So I don't have in my mind this idea that half of population is more similar to me and half of population is less similar to me. And this wider community of, say, the Homo sapiens, the humanity community, is, I believe, what unites our common experiences together. But actually going through puberty, as anyone who have gone through puberty knows, is a time of vulnerability, is a time of intense conversations, both within oneself and also with the outside world.
And having 2 of them surely makes you strong and resilient indeed. Tell us a little bit about your workday as digital minister and maybe your biggest challenge that you're facing, also your biggest success.
Certainly. So my work day, depending on which day of the week it is, I go to the cabinet meeting on Thursdays, but in other days, for example, on Wednesday and so on, I'm a teleworking minister, having been doing teleworking for 5 years now in the cabinet. So I would usually tour around Taiwan or visit the Social Innovation Lab at the heart of Taipei City, where anyone can have a conversation with me by dropping by, either physically or arranging a video conference for 40 minutes. And the only condition that I ask for is that the entire conversation should be published as either a co-edited transcript or as a video online in the Creative Commons. And so basically, the greatest suggestions from the civil society and so on is about making sure that, for example, we counter the pandemic so far with no lockdown, thanks to the visitors who brought novel ideas, for example, on making the mask availability into app that everybody can look at. Actually, not just one app, but around 100 apps. So people queuing in line don't have to queue in vain, but could rather go to the nearby pharmacy that still have PPE in stock. And all this was developed within just 3 days back last February, when the PPEs were still in shortage back then, and by people in Tainan who don't even have to physically visit me. We just arrange work sessions online.
In fact, you didn't really blow your own horn there, but doing that in those 3 days had everything to do with the fact that you essentially made it possible for innovators, I believe even hackers, to come up with a map and work with it in an open data setting. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I call it reverse procurement. Instead of the state coming up with ideas and buying service from the service sector, from the private sector, it is instead the civic hackers, the social sector volunteers who think of these great ideas and come to me and say, hey, we really need an open API, meaning that open data about mass availability need to be automatically refreshed every 30 seconds, like a distributed ledger, in order to make it possible for people who queue in line to see exactly what's happening with the people queuing before them, right? And so what I did is just to ensure this kind of fresh supply of high quality data, and that enabled, as I mentioned, more than 100 different applications.
Minister, let's stay with the challenge of governing, but take it to the political level. I talked about the glaring digital gaps that had been revealed by the pandemic. And amongst them, of course, the ability of many governments to respond to citizens' needs with agility and effectiveness. Not so in Taiwan. Your country and a few others have become global role models for combining collaborative civic technologies and social innovation to improve people's lives. Beyond the mask example, can you maybe give us another case or two that show how that works and perhaps why it works so well in Taiwan?
Yeah, well, I can keep talking about mask for another 15 minutes, including the pink mask story and the rainbow mask story. but of course, you asked me to say something else than masks, certainly. So for example, last month, a month ago, we collaborated with the same bunch of civic technologists in the G0V or Gov0 initiative that contributed the original mask map to develop Taiwan's check-in system, so that when people visit a venue, they can take their smartphone, scan a QR code, and check in. Now, I understand around the world, many countries have a similar system, but our system is quite unique in that it does not require you to install any app. Instead, it just uses the camera built into your camera, and it sends an SMS to a toll-free number 1922 that people already trust as the toll-free number to get counter-pandemic information. And the beauty of this arrangement is that even for elderly people who are not so well versed in QR code scanning, even with a flip phone or a feature phone, they can just manually type the 15 digits and send it to 1922 using their preferred SMS application. And for people with seeing difficulties, they can also copy and paste previous check-ins in their SMS application enabled by universal access and things like that. So the point here is, again, the social sector setting the norm of what to expect in a trustworthy check-in system, and we just implemented in a reverse procure setting.
You just used the word trust several times. I want to come back to that in just a moment, but can you say a little bit more about what the facilitating, enabling factors are for e-government in Taiwan, but perhaps beyond Taiwan as well? For countries that are looking to improve e-governance, and many, many are now, of course, what do they need to keep in mind?
Certainly, in Taiwan, we have constitutionally protected universal health care as a human right, but also access to basic education and access to communication. And extending that, we've implemented what I call broadband as a human right. So any place in Taiwan, even on the tip of Taiwan, almost 4,000 meters high, everyone is guaranteed to have 10 megabits per second of fast internet access for just 15 euros per month for unlimited data. And if you don't, it's my fault. People actually help me to account on things like that. So in addition to universal broadband, we also in our basic education system utilizes this new idea of digital competence and media competence rather than literacy, because literacy was about a few people using radio and television to talk to many people, and many people just becoming literate in it. But competence means everybody is a broadcaster now, everybody is a media now, everybody can make narrative now. And what's important is we need to democratize journalism so that everyone as young as primary schoolers can contribute to fact checking, can contribute to climate science through air boxes and things like that. So universal access to broadband and also a competence-based maker and producer-based basic education, I think are the two pillars to the e-governance.
That, of course, now links back to the question of trust as well as mistrust. Let's talk a little bit about digitalization and democracy, because, of course, increasingly the internet and digital platforms are being seen not so much as a facilitator of democracy, which many of us thought they would be in the initial euphoric years of the early 2000s, but in fact as a threat to democracy due to the echo chamber phenomenon that gives a very powerful platform to trolls and hate speech and disinformation. So building on some of what you've said, how do you think that we can ensure that digital tech is a force for development and democracy rather than the reverse? What are the most crucial things that have to happen?
Well, to paraphrase, I believe McLuhan, don't hate the social media, be the social media. In Taiwan, I make sure that we have what we call digital public infrastructure. That's to say the spaces where pro-social conversations are made. So for example, when someone as young as 16 or 17 want to start a social movement to ban plastic straws from takeouts of bubble tea, this actually happened, and rally 5,000 people and so on, they don't do that on Facebook. They do it on Join the G0V.TW, which is this one-stop shop for participatory budgeting, petitioning, regulatory oversight, and all these that has more than half of Taiwan's population participating, even residents and people not at voting age can and do participate very actively there. And so we hold our kind of digital equivalent of town halls in the digital equivalent of such infrastructures, instead of forcing everyone to have town hall-like deliberations in Facebook, which frankly speaking would be like shoving a town hall conversation into the nightlife district, very loud bars and noise, people selling addictive drinks, private bouncers, and so on. And with all due respect, there is a place where the nightlife district is just not to hold town hall meetings.
Say another word also, please, if you would, about media competence. What exactly are the skills that you're seeking to inculcate that help people to be part of discourse online in a way that enlarges that discourse rather than shrinking it or making those who talk loudest in the bar the ones who are heard?
Yeah, I think the most important part in this is what could be briefly called just journalism, right? The understanding of how to contribute to fact-finding, how to shape the narrative such that it contributes to anyone's fuller understanding of what things actually are instead of any one particular frame, and also the ability to listen across cultural and discipline differences and all sorts of differences in order to make a whole picture. So instead of asking the people who are very young to first wait until they're adults to contribute to journalism, in Taiwan, we have many young YouTubers, for example, going into the counting stations in national elections, making sure that when the votes are being counted, they add some analysis and counting to it. And actually that made the disinformation around, say, election fraud very hard to spread when each major party have their young YouTubers reporting pretty much the same numbers. And all of them can also fact check the 3 presidential candidates last year during their forum and debate and so on in real time in conjunction with professional journalists and so on. So I think it's the whole ecosystem that we invite more people to contribute to journalism.
Audrey, given what you said a moment ago about Facebook, I imagine you are following the discussion here in Europe about regulating platforms, both in terms of e-commerce, but also in terms of their responsibility for speech. What's your take on that?
Yeah, in Taiwan, for example, leading up to the presidential election of 2020, the social sector discovered that Facebook was, for the mayoral election 2018, was posting the foreign-sponsored advertisements on social and political issues, which was not disclosed as part of campaign donation or expenditure. And so basically a accord that's developed in the local pro-social social media system appeared, and many domestic players signed upon that to say basically we need to treat political and social advertisements during election time as campaign donation expenditure, which in Taiwan is limited to domestic donors and must be published as open data on the internet. That's to say it has to provide accountability in the form of machine readable transparency. So the people took that to Facebook, and instead of passing any new law like NetzDG or something, we just say to Facebook, look, we have viable alternatives to you here, and they have already signed on this accord, and if you don't, well, you will face social sanction. And so I believe Taiwan is one of, if not the first jurisdiction for which Facebook published in real time all the campaign donation-like advertisement during election as open data and working very closely in conjunction with local investigative journalists. So this is what I call a norm-first or people-public-private partnership approach, where the people first set a norm and the public sector just amplify it, so the economic sector player like Facebook have to conform and implement that norm.
Very, very interesting indeed. Let me ask you to pick up on also what you've just said about openness and transparency, and link that back to citizens' privacy. As you described the app where people don't have to use a barcode, but where they can simply essentially immediately gain access using the cameras on their phones. Is there a concern for you about privacy? And do you see a tension between these values of openness and transparency on the one hand and privacy on the other?
Well, not at all. I do believe that openness and transparency is the bedrock upon which that people can see not just the what of the policies, but the why of policy making, like the design process policy making, so that when we say this is a privacy enhancing technology, well, people don't have to take our words for it. They can check it for themselves on an open and transparent, say, open source GitHub or other open source platforms to actually check the code. And in case of the SMS, really there is no code to check because everybody can see very plainly that this simply sends a SMS message. Now, I do believe that before the pandemic, people already have certain norms. So during the pandemic, if our technological measures piggyback on the existing data collection points, for example, the SMS and so on, that people already come to be familiar and trust, then it's much easier for everyone to agree on the privacy and cybersecurity implications applications. On the other hand, if we develop entire new applications or even new devices like Bluetooth dongles and so on, then the society would take a very long time to come to a good enough consensus and agreement on the privacy norms around that, because, well, it wasn't there before the pandemic.
Thank you very much. And that, by the way, feeds into a very interesting debate here in Germany. We had many little distributed, decentralized testing centers that grew up over the last 4 or 5 weeks, all of which were collecting data on their own, now also storing it on their own. And suddenly people are aware about the security risks involved in those data depots. But apparently the thinking about that came a bit late in the game, but I'll just leave that there. I would like to ask you to just say one word about facial recognition technology, because of course, when we talk about citizens' privacy and also the potential for bias, that is a very, very central issue. How do you see this technology going forward? Is it something that should be very, very strictly regulated?
In Taiwan, we use it in 2 places. One is at the e-gate, at a place, it's opt-in, you don't have to use it, but you can use it in airports so that it compares strictly just with the biometric information in your passport so that you can pass through the gate on the airport easier. And I think the privacy harm, although it's there, it's minimal, because it's the way the camera is set up, it's very unlikely to take anybody else. It's a dedicated booth, and the processing is entirely at the edge, meaning that it's between your passport and that particular computer. And so it's more or less tolerated upon, I guess, in Taiwan for this particular case. And the other case is when I'm unlocking my own iPad. It uses Face ID, and my likeness is stored again just at the edge. And when Apple said that the Face ID chip does not transmit my likeness back to Cupertino, not because I worked with Apple for 6 years, but because of there really is no incentive for them to transmit back, I kind of take their words on it. But for everything else where it's easy to abuse, where it's hard to account for, then we seek the least privacy harm technologies, which are more often than not face recognition.
Thank you very much. One last question from me before we move on to audience questions, and it's about female leadership in technology, because of course we are having a discussion under the auspices of the Global Female Leaders platform, and therefore I'd like to ask you, do you see a gap in tech's female leadership within your own society? And what would be your advice and recommendations to attract more women to tech, especially in leadership roles?
Yeah, in the cabinet as well as in the parliament. Well, let's start with the presidency, right? Our president is 100% women, but in our parliament, the MPs who are women are more than 40%, I believe, at this stage. So there's many politician role models for women who want to be active on politics. On the other hand, for science, technology, engineering, and math, or for STEM graduates, we just hit the 25% mark when it comes to women's representation. So we have a long way to go in STEM as compared to politics. Now, what we've been doing is basically rebrand STEM to be more design focused. So some people say STEAM, including art, or STEAM D, including design, because the same role like programmer in Taiwan, when we translate that to 程式设计, program design, which is the more dominant translation than software engineering, then it conveys this gender neutrality or really diversity and inclusion message. But if we call it an engineering profession, then certain stereotypes set in our part of the world. So what we're doing now is emphasizing more on the design part, on the connecting people to people part, and also just filming short clips in which I said, computer never cared about my gender when I learned computers, which also helps.
Thank you very much. That's great. I see that we have a couple of audience questions coming in. I will take the ones now that I see in the chat, and then I will also ask those amongst us to please use your raising hand icon or give me a sign otherwise that you would like to speak, and we'll try to get some live comments as well. So a first question from Deborah Lorenzen, who is in Boston. Hi, Deborah. And this goes to you, Minister Tang, and she thanks you very much and says, you've talked about innovations such as distributed ledger and inviting hackers, innovators to participate directly in government. Can you please speak about your tactics in getting the government and pre-existing cultural norms to accept this kind of help? And how have you convinced the institutions to accept that level of change?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the two motivations in any large institutions to introduce this kind of innovation is to save time and to reduce risk. So all the innovations that we did, including the mask map and the SMS check-in, are there so that people can save time compared to pen and paper. And also there's less privacy harm, there's less risk involved, especially for the public service. Now, of course, you may think if we publish the number every 30 seconds, wouldn't there be a lot of errors in terms of the data bias and so on in the mask availability scenario? You would be correct, but the main difference between the previous regime, which is based on Freedom of Information Act, where the public service has to review before a number goes out and published, in our every 30-second updated ledger-like technology, no public servant actually reviewed the number before it's published. It's published upon collection. So almost paradoxically, this relieves everybody of the burdens of risk because nobody is to blame if the numbers are wrong. So what this design did basically is to make sure that the public servant can concentrate their time and focus on assisting fellow human beings, fellow citizens, rather than wasting their time on absorbing the blame or on completing the bureaucratic red tapes and things like that. So as long as you build, like I build myself as a public servant to the public service, then there's virtually no resistance to this way of radical transparency and collaboration in the public service in Taiwan.
Thank you very much. I also have a question from Bertrand de la Chapelle, and it is this. Is the size of Taiwan a key factor for success in such governance and democratic innovation? And how could this be scaled up to larger countries?
Well, at around 24 million people, Taiwan isn't exactly small. I'll call it mid-sized maybe, but it is true that broadband as a human right makes the urban-rural gap much smaller. That is to say, everybody can actually have similar life experiences because everybody connects pretty much to the same services digitally on the same speed. Actually, the rural place probably is faster because we auction off our 5G spectrum so that more advanced deployment happens first on remote and rural places. And so I do believe that broadband is a great equalizer, and it can make a larger landmass to feel more scale-free by making sure that everybody enjoy the same near speed of light connection to one another.
Thank you very much for that. And I also see that Iris Patricia Führer would like to pose a question. So please, Iris, go ahead. Don't forget to unmute when you do.
Thank you so much. Hi, I'm calling in from the Netherlands, and I really love the questions, and I love what I learned from your answers, Audrey. So thank you so much. So inspiring. What I heard a lot is about, well, privacy, facial recognition, trust, be the social media, and how you educate, and as broadband is one of the human rights. And I followed the discussion yesterday here in the Netherlands about deep fake. And I wanted to ask the question, how do you deal with deep fake? I mean, if you say teenagers go to the elections and they're YouTubers, so they post on social media. And the more we are the social media, the more our voice is out there, our facial expression is out there. And so deep fake, how do you educate people, or how do you take precautions? How do you prevent, or how do you, the whole thing around deep fake would interest me, how you tackle that.
Very, very interesting question. Please, Audrey Tang, go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. I think what matters is that government, including, well, government ministers, need to have this sort of direct access, which is the entire point of my Wednesday calls and video conferences and in-person visits with anyone at the Social Innovation Lab. Because if there's deepfakes of me circulating around and people know for sure that every once a week, actually once every few days, they can actually see on my official YouTube channel and many other social media places where they can literally ask me anything, then there's no room for the deepfake to spread. But imagine if I only come to parliamentary interpellation and only talk in the form of press releases, then suddenly the environment is very different and deepfakes become very easy to spread simply because the interval, that's to say the time it takes between a challenge to my response is too long for people's comfort. So people, in order to fill in a story, to fulfill the gestalt, the holistic imagination, will then start to accept deepfakes and other sources. And the other thing about deepfakes is it's not unlike, say, spams. Previously in text-only media such as email, there's also a lot of fake emails, phishing emails, spam emails, and so on. And it's fixed not through laws alone, but through the volunteer action of people voluntarily clicking off those incoming spam as, well, spam, and sending to, say, Spam House and other international collaborations, so that the same incomings from the sender will be labeled as untrustworthy, and their next emails will arrive at people's junk mail folder rather than the inbox, right? So it's like a community immune system of sorts. Now we're building exactly the same thing through the international fact-checking network, through the GovZero community and many communities. People who spot deepfakes can flag it in a online chatbot in the Taiwan's leading antivirus company, and also in quite a few startups. There's at least 4 different players in the ecosystem, and reporting to either one of them will enable us to have early detection of the deepfakes and disinformation and conspiracy theory that are going viral, having a R value of above 1, and then work on the countermeasures and clarifications.
Thank you very much. And I see that we have a question that has come in from Seun Okanlawan Odeku, and it basically goes back to some of those digital challenges I mentioned at the outset that have been, of course, revealed by the pandemic, amongst them digital inequality. And her question is this: please, do you have any thoughts in terms of using technology to help with education of less privileged children in rural areas who have limited access to the internet? And if you have come across any examples of how countries are overcoming this. And that question does come from Seun, who is in Lagos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in especially small islands or landlocked countries, it is a real issue because the outgoing broadband access itself is expensive, or the bandwidth is limited, and therefore the rural and remote places are often sacrificed. Nowadays, with the development of low Earth orbit and what we call beyond 5G technologies, including offerings from Starlink, Amazon, and friends, this is being tackled upon in a much more economic fashion by essentially not relying on sea cables or other landlines in order to have pretty good connectivity. So I do think this is a technological issue that could be tackled from the technological perspective. But even when Starlinks and Amazon and so on are online, of course, it still takes a lot of effort in the local education facilities to make sure that in order to have broadband access, it's not enough just to have the broadband itself, but also know which community to connect to and so on. And in Taiwan, we have this digital opportunity center companion system where the undergrads in the cities and so on often pair with in the more rural places, especially younger children. Instead of teaching them anything, they simply bring them into the online communities like OpenStreetMap, Wikipedia, and things like that, so that they can conceive of more co-creational neighbors on the internet.
Thank you very much. We also have another live question from Susan Tackenberg. So Susan, please go ahead. And I'll just say our time is now slowly drawing to a close. So if you could, it'd be great to have a brief question.
Very brief. Yes. Thank you so much, Minister Tang. Very, very interesting. On the educational side, it seems to me that you're describing an ideal situation where it's very fluid. And the idea of bringing the arts and design into STEM. So how can we develop a taxonomy around that? How do we develop the language that informs our educational processes in these interdisciplinary skills? Do you have any suggestions there in our so-called Western societies, in our universities and so on?
Yes, and I propose that we change many vocabularies around STEM-based conversations, because when we talk about ICT, Internet and Communication Technology, or information technology, we often just focus on the connection between machines and machines. But when we talk about digitalization, I often stress that all in digital, we're talking about connecting people to people. So on my Twitter, it is pinned, my job description, and I wrote that in 2016, a month before I became the digital minister, when the post was announced, because people didn't have any experience in Taiwan for a digital minister. I was the first digital minister, and so my job description is literally about changing those words, and very quickly, this is my job description. When we see the Internet of Things, let's make it an Internet of Beings. When we see virtual reality, let's make it a shared reality. When we see machine learning, let's make it collaborative learning. When we see user experience, let's make it about human experience. And whenever we hear the singularity is near, let us always remember the plurality is here.
Wow. That was fascinating. Thank you very much for sharing that. I have one last audience question. I'm just going to pose it super quickly. It comes from Bertrand de la Chapelle again. I heard there are important experiments in Taiwan regarding collaborative drafting of laws. Is that accurate? Could you tell us more?
Yeah, definitely. If you search for the words polis in Taiwan, you will find quite a few write-ups. Polis at polis.gov.tw is now a public digital infrastructure where any level of public servant can open up this kind of wiki survey where people post each other's resonated feelings about emerging topics. The original one was from 2015 about UberX, where people just resonated with each other's feelings without a reply button. Just say, I resonate, I don't resonate, and a visualization that moves people who feel similar into the clusters. And something magical happened because there's no reply button. There is no room for trolls to grow. So always after 3 or 4 weeks of this resonating together, we always arrive on a set of good enough consensus around, say, insurance, not undercutting existing meters, registrations, and so on, which then we take as agenda for face-to-face and live stream multi-stakeholder meeting with Uber and other taxis. And that turned into the 2016 Multi-Purpose Taxi Act. So Uber is a valid taxi fleet in Taiwan now, the Q taxi, but also the local temples and churches can also operate their own multi-purpose fleets to serve the need of the local people and so on. So the point here is that the internet is used as a crowdsourced agenda setter. It's not there to replace the need for in-person or town hall style meetings, but rather is used to augment, to enhance, assist the human-to-human link.
Thank you very much. One more audience question came in, but I'm not going to ask you to answer it separately. I'm going to essentially integrate it into my final question to you. My final question to you, and I know you have to leave us soon, so you're welcome to answer it briefly. My final question is what you see as the 2 or 3 biggest global challenges we face in the coming decade, and whether you think that there are unexploited opportunities for tech to play a role in solving those challenges. And the question from the audience was how you bring the Asian culture together with the digital world. So maybe you can fold that into the solutions part in your answer.
Sure. I was born in 1981 into a martial law regime, right? The longest martial law in the world. And so in our part of East Asia, we're quite young in democratization. Our first presidential direct election was in 1996, a year already after the World Web became really popular in Taiwan. So internet and democracy for us are not two things. These are the same thing. And we think about democracy the same way we think about, say, semiconductor design, right? This is very professional stuff, cutting edge stuff, but there is room for design and experiment. And instead of just saying, you know, voting, which is like uploading 3 bits per person every 4 years, we think about how to improve the bit rate of democracy, how to make sure that there is more signals between the elections and referenda so that people can come to common good enough consensus despite their initially different positions and so on. So thinking about democracy itself as a technology, as a social technology, I believe is a powerful metaphor that is underexploited in the more honored traditions of older democracies in the West. And I do believe this is something that we can contribute and work together on.
Thank you very, very much for this truly inspiring and wide-ranging conversation. Minister Audrey Tang, I've got thanks pouring in here on the chat from all different regions from our participants. So greatly appreciated that you shared your insights and experiences with us in this very wonderful dialogue, our first virtual talk under the Global Female Leaders roof. So we're very honored that that you agreed to join us for this, and we wish you utmost success with your efforts in future. And I would also like to thank all of the GFL community. It's been so great to see you all again, and it's really a pleasure that we were able to share this this break together. And I hope that we'll see each other again very soon. Stay healthy, everyone. And thanks, of course, to the GFL team for making this possible.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Very good question. Thank you. Live long and prosper, everyone.